Welcome to the deep dive. Loneliness. It's a big topic, isn't it? We see it everywhere. Japan, the UK, they've even got ministers for loneliness trying to tackle this so-called epidemic.
Hmm.
But okay, let's unpack this. What if there's a deeper, more complex layer to loneliness we often miss? Something more hidden.
Absolutely. And that's really the key distinction, isn't it? Because we often jump straight to, individual fixes. So today our mission is to dig into the social stigma of loneliness, particularly how older people experience it. We need to shift from seeing it just as a personal problem to understanding how society itself actually shapes this feeling.
Okay, let's zoom in then, because loneliness isn't just, being physically alone or even social isolation technically. It's that subjective feeling, right?
Yeah.
That lack of real companionship.
Exactly, that internal experience.
And here's where it gets really interesting. For a long time, especially, say, in psychology research, this social stigma aspect, it was almost, well, invisible. Some early stuff practically pointed the finger at lonely people, calling them socially inept. Why do you think that blind spot was there for so long?
That's a great question. And the source material we're looking at today uses a really interesting sociological lens. It cleverly combines two big theories. First, there's Irving Goffman's idea of relationality,
Okay.
which basically says stigma isn't some fixed quality a person has. It's something that emerges in social interactions. It's that tension,
Right.
between how society expects you to be or classifies you, your virtual social identity, and who you actually are, your actual social identity.
Right. So the mismatch creates the stigma, like being labeled lonely when that doesn't capture your whole reality.
Precisely. And then, to understand how widespread this is, we bring in Imogen Tyler's concept of productive power.
Productive power. How does that fit?
Well, Tyler argues stigma isn't just a label. It's an active force. It produces social structures. It literally works to keep people in, down, and away,
Yeah.
reinforcing hierarchies. So think about that loneliness epidemic talk we mentioned. It might, without meaning to, end up praising constant social connection, hypersociability and independence.
Yeah.
And that implicitly stigmatizes anyone who doesn't quite fit that mold.
Wow. Okay. That really flips my understanding. It's not just my feeling, it's how society frames and reacts to that feeling. So putting Goffman and Tyler together, the source identifies three dimensions of this loneliness stigma, like stages.
Kinda, yeah, three conceptual dimensions. First is inaction.
Yeah.
That's the active stuff, labeling, stereotyping, discrimination.
I'm feeling at the stigma.
Right. Then there's reception, how people actually experience that, how they internalize those stigmatizing messages and feelings. And finally, management, which is all about the strategies people use to cope, sometimes even to hide their loneliness altogether.
Let's make this concrete. Can you give some examples from the research? Maybe with older Australians?
Sure. Let's start with inaction. Think about Gurney. He was 90, living in a care home. He described how staff would sometimes dismiss his thoughts. Quick nod, maybe a patronizing smile, or hurried yes, dear.
Ugh.
It wasn't just about being busy. It felt like they were enacting that stigma. Oh, he's just old and lonely. What he says doesn't really matter. Or Lisa, 72. She faced outright discrimination at work. It shows how loneliness stigma gets tangled up with ageism, with financial worries. It's not separate.
And you mentioned hiding it.
Yeah, many participants really concealed their loneliness. They preferred being potentially discreditable, where someone might find out, rather than openly discredited as lonely. They saw it almost as a personal failure.
That's tough. So that leads into reception, how they felt inside.
Exactly. People expressed real embarrassment, a sense of shame, even blaming themselves, I should have made more friends. Patricia, 79, didn't tell her own kids how lonely she felt. She said she didn't want to make them miserable.
Oh, wow. Carrying that burden alone.
And Bob, 75, he used words like feeling unproductive, even like a parasite. Think about that. He'd internalized society's devaluing message about being older and lonely.
It's incredibly heavy. So if they're feeling this shame, how did they try to manage it day to day?
Well, Audrey, another care home resident, actively hid the fact she lived there from her friends. She wanted to keep up this image of being independent.
Maintaining that virtual identity Goffman talked about.
Exactly. In June 73, she'd tell people, oh, I love being alone. But privately, she hated it. It's a performance, really. Managing your public self becomes this vital defense against the shame associated with loneliness.
It becomes so clear listening to this. Loneliness stigma isn't this isolated thing. It's deeply woven into other stigmas, age, frailty, perhaps poverty, and it's constantly reinforced by these broader societal values that really prize youth, independence, always being busy, always connected.
Absolutely. It's systemic. And that's the crucial takeaway. If we see loneliness not just as personal pain, but as a social, maybe even a political injury, then the solutions have to be bigger too. It's not just about, say, more social clubs. True destigmatization means tackling the societal structures, the stigma optics, as the source calls them.
The lens through which we see it.
Yeah, the lens that devalues and excludes people in the first place.
So this brings us to a pretty provocative thought for you, our listener. Think about this. What if programs designed to help lonely people, even with the best intentions, actually end up reinforcing the stigma if they don't address these deeper social dynamics? What does that mean for you? For how we can all foster genuine networks of care and solidarity right where we live, in our own communities? Something to really mull over.